The trip had been planned weeks ago, long before the quiet distance settled between us. When we finally packed our bags and left the city, I kept telling myself this getaway might fix everything. The long road, the cold air, the mountains rising like calm giants. Maybe all of it would pull us back toward each other. But even as we drove, my boyfriend barely looked up from his phone. I glanced at him every few minutes, waiting for him to notice I was watching, but his eyes stayed fixed on the screen. It shouldn't have bothered me as much as it did, yet it felt like sitting next to a stranger. When we reached the resort, the silence between us walked into the room with us. The wooden cabin smelled like pine, and the windows opened to a breathtaking view of tall trees swaying gently. I wanted to share the moment with him, to smile at something together, to feel like partners again. But he dropped his bag on the sofa, muttered something about work messages, and sat down immediately. The phone lit his face more than the sunlight ever did. I tried not to let it sink into me. I walked outside for a moment, breathing in the cold mountain air. That's when I noticed another traveler standing near the pathway, camera hanging around his neck. He looked up and smiled politely, the kind of smile strangers exchange when they have no reason to be anything but kind. I returned the smile and kept walking, thinking it was nothing. Later, as evening approached, my boyfriend finally looked up and asked if I wanted tea. It was a small gesture, but even that felt like effort. We sat together for a few minutes, sipping quietly. I asked about his day, his work, anything that might open a conversation, but he answered in short phrases and returned to scrolling. My chest felt tight. Loneliness had a strange way of creeping in even when someone was sitting right beside you. When I stepped out again to clear my head, I found the same traveler sitting on the wooden railing, looking at the horizon. He greeted me with a gentle nod. I didn't want to seem rude, so I replied, and we began a simple conversation. He asked if it was my first time visiting the mountains, and I told him yes. His voice had an easy calmness to it, the kind you don't notice until you're craving warmth. We talked about the resort, the view, how exhausting city life could be. Nothing deep, nothing personal, yet it felt smoother than any conversation I'd had with my boyfriend in weeks. When I mentioned that I came here with someone, he smiled and said it must be nice to share such a beautiful place with a partner. I didn't know how to respond. I only managed a quiet, yeah, hoping he couldn't hear the hesitation behind it. He didn't push. Instead, he talked about his own travels, how he liked meeting people, how the mountains made him feel more alive. I listened more than I spoke, but somehow it felt like I was being heard. Eventually, I walked back inside, telling myself it was just harmless small talk. But a part of me knew something was shifting inside, something subtle, something I didn't want to admit. Later at night, after dinner, my boyfriend lay on the bed scrolling through messages again, the screen illuminating his face in the dark room. I watched him for a moment, the quiet ache inside me growing heavier. I wanted him to reach for me, to ask how I felt, to show even a little curiosity about the growing silence between us. But he didn't. He turned off the lamp on his side and fell asleep quickly, leaving the room dim and cold that I stepped outside once more, needing the air, needing space to breathe. The resort path was quiet, the sky full of stars. And there, again, was the same traveler from earlier, staring up at the night sky as if he belonged to it. He noticed me and gave the same gentle, warm smile. Something about that smile made the loneliness inside me rise like a tide. I didn't know it then, but the night was about to change everything. The cold air brushed against my face as I walked toward the railing, trying to quiet the uneasy thumping in my chest. The traveler turned slightly, as if he'd been expecting someone, and when he saw me, he simply said, "Couldn't sleep either?" His voice carried the same calm warmth it had earlier, and for a moment, I felt something settle inside me. Something I didn't realize had been trembling that I leaned against the railing beside him, keeping a respectful distance. "No, Ovia, just needed some air." He nodded like he understood something deeper behind the words. "Sometimes silence feels heavier at night," he said softly. The way he said it made me wonder if he could see through me, if he sensed the loneliness I tried so hard to hide that we stood in the quiet for a little while, watching the stars shimmer above the dark treetops. He told me a funny story about a previous trip of his, Something about getting lost during a hiking trail and convincing himself a squirrel was guiding him back. I laughed more freely than I expected. My laughter felt unfamiliar, almost like hearing a part of myself I hadn't used in a long time. That he looked at me then, really looked at me, and said, "It's nice to hear you laugh." I didn't know why those simple words tightened my throat. Nobody had said something like that to me in months. I felt suddenly exposed, and I turned my gaze back to the sky. "It's been a stressful time," I admitted quietly. He didn't ask for details. He didn't pry. He just waited, giving the kind of space that gently invites honesty. So I found myself saying more. I talked about how distant things had become with my boyfriend, how I kept trying to reconnect, but felt like I was talking to a wall. How lonely it was to love someone who no longer seemed to see you. He listened carefully, every now and then nodding, his expression full of understanding rather than judgment. "You deserve to feel seen," he said simply. Something about the sincerity in his voice sent a wave through me. It wasn't flirtation, it was kindness, the kind I'd been starving for without admitting it. The breeze grew colder, and he offered me his jacket without saying a word. I hesitated, but when he draped it lightly over my shoulders, his hands brushing me only briefly, I felt warmth spread through me in a way that startled me. I told myself it was just the jacket, just the cold. But deep inside, something else was stirring, something that scared me because it felt good that we walked along the wooden path, quietly talking, quietly listening. Each step felt like it pulled me further away from the version of myself I had been holding together. At one point, he stopped and looked out at the valley below, the dim light reflecting in his eyes. "You know," he said softly, "sometimes you meet people at the exact moment you need to, even if you don't realize it." I felt that line settle in my chest like a stone dropping into water. I told him he was easy to talk to. He smiled, not proud, just gentle. "You're easy to understand," he replied. We stood closer than before, not touching, but near enough for me to feel the warmth of his presence. The silence between us was different now, charged, alive, full of unspoken things neither of us dared to name. When he reached out, it wasn't bold or hurried. It was slow, tentative, almost hesitant. His hand brushed mine lightly, as if asking a silent question. I should have stepped back. I knew that. The thought crossed my mind, but so did every moment of emptiness I'd felt for weeks. So did the ache that had been building in my chest that I didn't pull away. Our hands touched fully then, fingers lightly curling. It was the smallest contact, but it felt impossibly intimate. My breath caught, and he looked at me with an expression that was both soft and apologetic. "This feels wrong," I whispered. He nodded. "I know." But neither of us moved. He stepped a little closer, close enough that I could feel his warmth mixing with the cold night air. And when he leaned in, it wasn't forceful or rushed. It was gentle, almost questioning. Our lips met briefly, soft, hesitant, a moment that lasted only seconds but felt like an entire confession. The instant it happened, guilt surged through me so fast it almost made me dizzy. I stepped back, heart pounding hard enough to hear it. He looked at me with the same warm, understanding expression, not pushing, not asking for more. "I'm sorry," I whispered. He shook his head. "Don't be. Just take care of your heart." I walked back to the cabin with trembling hands, the jacket still around my shoulders. Inside, my boyfriend stirred and looked at me through sleepy eyes, asking where I had gone. "Elite." The lie felt sharp, like a splinter driven deep under the skin. When I lay beside him, the weight of what I'd done settled over me like a heavy blanket. I kept my eyes open in the darkness, hearing nothing but the sound of his breathing and the echo of the moment I couldn't undo. Morning arrived with a thin layer of sunlight leaking through the curtains, but it didn't warm me. I barely slept, turning over again and again, hearing my heartbeat pounding louder than the quiet room. When I finally sat up, my boyfriend was already awake, sitting at the edge of the bed as if he had been waiting for me to move. He glanced back at me with a strange look, half concern, half confusion. "You came in really late last night," he said, his voice still rough from sleep. "Everything okay?" My breath caught for a moment. I nodded too quickly. "Yeah, I just couldn't sleep." He didn't argue, but something in his eyes lingered. He stood, stretched, and walked toward the kitchenette to make tea. I watched him move around, his familiar gestures, his habits, his quiet way of doing things. For years, these were the things that made me feel safe. But now, watching him felt strange, like looking at a memory I wasn't sure how to hold anymore, that we sat outside on the small wooden deck, sipping tea without speaking much. I kept replaying the night in my mind, the touch, the warmth, the guilt, and every time the memory surfaced, I felt a tightness in my stomach. When my boyfriend reached out to hand me the sugar bowl, I flinched without meaning to. He froze, noticing it. "What's going on with you?" he asked, not harshly, but with a tired sincerity that left no room to hide. That I looked away, eyes drifting toward the path where the traveler had walked the night before. I didn't see him now, but the thought of crossing paths again made my chest tighten even more. "I'm just tired," I said weakly. "That's not all." He set his cup down. "You've been distant since last night. Did something happen?" The question hung between us like a heavy weight. My heart thudded so loudly I thought he could hear it. I wanted to lie, just one more lie, but the guilt felt too raw, too heavy to carry into another day, that I shook my head slowly, then whispered, "Something happened." His face shifted, the faint calmness breaking. "What do you mean?" he asked quietly. I swallowed hard, searching for a version of the truth that wouldn't shatter everything. "I talked to someone last night," I said, "and it felt different, more than it should have." My eyes dropped to my hands. I crossed a line. Silence fell instantly. My boyfriend stared at me, his expression blank at first, then slowly tightening with hurt. "Did you?" He stopped himself, his jaw clenching. "It wasn't what you think," I said quickly. "It wasn't that. It was just a moment. But it shouldn't have happened." His shoulders slumped, as if the air had left him. "Why?" he whispered. "Why would you?" I didn't have a clean answer, only truths that felt too tangled to say aloud. "Because I've been lonely," I said softly. "Even with you. I've been trying to reach you, but you always feel 1,000 miles away. And last night, someone listened. Someone noticed I existed." The words hurt him. I could see in the way he looked down, fists curling slightly. "You should have told me," he said after a long pause. "I didn't know you felt that way." "I tried," I whispered. "But maybe I didn't try hard enough. Maybe we both didn't." He nodded slowly, as if accepting a truth he didn't want to carry. The morning breeze brushed between us, making the silence colder. After a few minutes, he stood up and walked inside without a word. I stayed on the deck, staring at the mountains, feeling the consequences settle in my bones. When I finally returned to the room, he was packing his bag. Not angrily, just quietly, as though he had made a decision while I wasn't watching. "We should go home," he said softly. "We need time to think." I wanted to ask if we were still we, but I didn't have the courage, and maybe he didn't have the answer. As we walked toward the car, I spotted the traveler standing near the path, adjusting his backpack. He looked up at me, offering a small, gentle smile. I forced a faint nod in return, but I didn't speak. There was nothing left to say down on the drive back. The silence felt sharper than it had on the way there. Not angry, just full of things broken open. My boyfriend kept his eyes on the road, hands gripping the steering wheel a little too tightly. I leaned my head against the window, watching the scenery blur past. I didn't know what waited for us at home: closure or rebuilding, separation or something softer. But I knew one thing clearly: infidelity, even in its smallest form, didn't solve the ache. It only unmasked it, forcing you to face what you'd been avoiding. And now all I had left was to face it,